Okay. Okay, so lots of active participation from our visually impaired members, Joanna and Tim, as well as me, I hope. We're joined today by Clare and May, super experienced audio describer who recently did a tour of the Royal College of Physicians for London Open House weekend, and also by Ros, who's stepped in to be our technical whiz for today, but has lots of experience describing. So welcome to the meeting, and if anybody else joins Ros, do please shout as they join, because I know that there's somebody else coming. I'm going to start by asking Joanne. Sorry, is it Joanne or Joanna? You don't need to be on mute, Joanne.
It's Joanne.
Joanne, have you ever been on an audio described visit to a building to see for the architecture of the building, as opposed to because it contained a theatre or contained a museum or something?
Not a building, no.
No. And Tim, have you ever been on one?
I think I did one before COVID that Vocalise were doing. It was one in London. I'm trying to remember where it was now, but I think I've done one. Yeah.
It was obviously memorable.
Not that memorable.
Do you remember who did it?
I think it was Di. I think it was Di who did it. Yeah, it was Di Langford. Yeah.
Okay. And Ros, have you ever given a tour of a building as a piece of architecture?
You're on mute, Ros. You're still on mute, Ros.
What I'm trying to do is find the user group link so that I can send something out. Okay, yes, I have. And very enjoyable they are too. A lot of research goes into them. I did Guildhall, and I've done the Photographers Gallery, and oh gosh, a few others. Yeah.
Very good. And Clare, was this your first rodeo when you did it at the Royal College of Physicians, or had you done a lot of buildings before?
Yeah, I've done quite a few. I mean, I started in 2008 doing them. Yeah, I did. I've done Haberdashers' Hall, Portcullis House, Old Royal Naval College. Where else? Oh, I did a Victorian eco house once, which was sort of quite interesting. I wouldn't say it was a highlight of an architectural tour, but it was quite interesting. Yeah. So
we've just had Charmaine join us, Edward.
Oh, brilliant! Hello, Charmaine.
Hi.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning. Now you're one of our visually impaired members, is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got Joanne and Tim and me as visually impaired people, and we've got Clare and Ros in the meeting. Clare, who recently did a tour of the Royal College of Physicians. We've just been saying, so Joanne's never done a visit, an audio described visit to an architectural site for a building for its architecture. Tim did do one, if pre-COVID, and remembers very little about it. So I'm going to ask you if you've done one.
I don't think I have, actually, but no, just immersing myself generally in all things audio description, but no, obviously very keen to hear people's experiences. Not in buildings, no. Galleries, no. So no, not that I can think of. If one comes to mind, I don't think so.
Okay, that's good. Okay, and Clare was outlining some of the buildings that she's done. Ros has also done tours of buildings. So I'm going to start by asking you, Charmaine, if you were to go on a tour of a building to see what the building is like, what sort of building would it be, and what would you hope to discover about it? And Joanne, I'll come to you with the same question next, and the same for Tim afterwards.
It would probably be some kind of historic house. I'm very interested in sort of arts and heritage, and that would, be an interest from my previous sighted life, and obviously getting more immersed in various different audio described events as I evolved through my own sight loss situation. I went to a really great gallery event, one of the sensational museum exhibitions during some holiday. So I'm very much getting out and about there. Historic house. I'm very interested personally, and I think anyone with blindness or sight loss always wants to orient themselves and navigate them and know where they are. Um, I have a little bit of residual eyesight, and I do find that useful. I think I remember going to 222, a ghost story at the Criterion Theatre, which Tim was present at on an iMatter event, and I loved the pre-show notes, because I'd listened to them I think beforehand, and they described the stage so well. I probably listened to them in theatre themselves after I'd done the touch tour and been up on stage on that particular occasion. And with my little bit of residual eyesight, I kind of scan the environment and see as much as I can see. And I was really loving the fact that the pre-show notes had made that stage environment, they'd conveyed that so well through audio description. It was really phenomenal. And yeah, and my little bit of eyesight, I kind of pick up on some things, to orient myself. So I'm always really interested in kind of spaces and spatial awareness and where things are. I was on a Royal Collections Trust descriptive Zoom yesterday, and they were describing, funnily enough, I suppose this is a historic house, funnily enough, it's just come to mind. They were describing Queen Mary's Doll's House. And I realize I do everything on my iPhone with voiceover, but if I put voiceover off, I can kind of make the picture bigger on Zoom calls sometimes, not always. And I looked at this picture of, and they told you a bit about the room, and it was a study with a mantelpiece, and I made the picture bigger so I could kind of see the broad scope of the room without seeing any detail. And then they showed another, I don't think I'd missed it by zooming in, but there was a big hand. And then at this point, you realised that it was Queen Mary's Doll's House. It wasn't actually a real human-sized room in physical space. So just kind of those kind of things. I think you can kind of make a bit of a blindness game of it all and really enjoy yourself sort of working out the puzzle. You know, if you've got eyesight, you can make the most of your residual eyesight if you want to do that, or if you don't, you can make the most of, there's a poetry to audio description, and you can convey stuff in other sensory ways other than sight. So you're very much interested in navigating a space and sort of orientating myself in a space of a historic house. There you go, I'll be quiet now.
Okay. Joanne, what's your idea of what a tour of a building would be like? Oh, is Joanne still there?
No, I think we've lost her, I think.
Okay. Right.
She's gone off the call.
Okay, you tell me what your idea of a building is.
Well, I've actually remembered a couple of things now. So one of the ones that I was talking about was like a cross between a tour of buildings, and historic buildings, and like almost a gallery sort of museum thing, because I did the Tower of London a couple of times, and we did a lot of tours through actual rooms, and the rooms are actually sort of described, and the walls and what were on the walls. But also, I have done another one that I've just remembered, which is Chatsworth House, which is in Bakewell, and they did an audio tour of all the rooms and the house. And I actually found that incredibly engaging and interesting, because there were certain things, because of I struggle with, I have a light sensitivity, and because of the lighting, which wasn't particularly good, it was kind of glaring at times. There was lots of things, lots of details, and lots of things that I couldn't see, and I couldn't actually make out. And there were two people who were doing a two-hander really, and they were like they were describing all the details and all the things within in the rooms and the corridors and I actually found that really fleshed it out for me and kind of brought it to life. And I love sort of Chatsworth anyway. I think it's one of my favorite sort of places. So
you were just born in the wrong century, Tim, weren't you?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but I feel that there's so much aesthetic and character, personality and history, and I think especially in some of these historic houses, and there's so many of them. I think that there's so much detail, I think, to be brought to life with a sort of description of them as well.
Okay, so I'll go next.
Before you do, Edward, can I just say
Yes.
I've sent an email to other members of the EVI group, so hopefully they'll pick it up.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Ross. So Clare's tour of the Royal College of Physicians was something which I heard about because Paul Downs, who was our on secretary at the time, asked if Ada could fund Open City, that's the London Open House charity, to do this, and we couldn't. But I made a donation to Open City that covered the cost of Clare doing it, and so it was able to go ahead. And I thought it was going to be absolutely jam-packed with people because Paul had done a huge amount of promotional work. All our VI members will have seen like 6 or 7 mentions of it, saying that this was an available thing to do. As it happened, on the day, I was one of 2 visually impaired people who came for the tour, which was me and my partner who came as my companion, and Paul came as companion to another visually impaired person. And it was a building that is definitely not my cup of tea. So I was outside my normal 18th century classical, classical Georgian architecture comfort zone. It's a post-war building in an extraordinary modern style. It's still controversial because it doesn't sit comfortably in its surroundings, or it doesn't sit naturally in the surroundings. It's juxtaposed with all the neighbouring buildings because it's so modern in style. Anyway, there was so when I arrived and we discovered that there were just 2 of us, I thought this is going to be good because small groups for me always makes for a better tour. And the other big bonus was that the librarian from Royal College of Physicians was there as well. So what was I expecting? I think I was expecting to walk the space and feel the lengths and breadths of things and feel the acoustics, just to see what the grand spaces were like and how they worked. I think I was expecting to hear stories about how the spaces are used. And I think I was going to feel quite a lot of the physical characteristics of it. I can remember in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of new buildings with exposed concrete as part of their window walls and so forth. So actually feeling the materials from which the building was made, but at the same time trying to get a sense of the height and so forth. So that was my expectation. What did I enjoy about it? The things which I thought were really, really good about it were the unexpectedly good things, I should say, were first of all, that the Royal College of Physicians had a model made of the building for a previous tour. And it's a big thing. Claire, how big is it? About 6 feet across, maybe?
Probably less than that, actually.
4 feet? I mean,
Yeah,
120, 150 centimetres, maybe, model of the building, which is normally kept on a tabletop with a big glass box on top of it. But for this occasion, the glass box had been removed. So it was actually possible to feel the shape of the entire building. And that was really enlightening because there was no amount of numerical data that Clare could give about it. It's a box on top of another box, and it's sort of whatever it is that fitted my imagination of what a building looked like. And only when I could feel it could I feel how one box was sort of overhanging at the front and forming the entrance area and so forth. The second thing, which was a huge bonus, was having the librarian able to explain, because the library is the most impressive space in many respects, because it's got a kind of hush to it after all the clatter of the big open spaces. It's clearly a place where the contents are revered. And whilst we didn't actually get to handle any books, there were some books which were described because they were out on display. So we had a sense of the room and what it's used for now, and how the light is made to play in it and so forth, because it's often used as a lecture theatre as well. So they have to be able to close off the top lit space of the room. And that wouldn't have come to life with any audio describer who wasn't actually a member of the staff, who was used to explaining how the room is used, what's there, and everything else. It doesn't trip off the tongue. It becomes scripted if it's done by an audio describer. So that was the third thing that was a bonus. And the last thing, which was there's an extension at the back, which is a big circular room, and the acoustic. It's a completely dead sound in there. It's very cleverly designed acoustic in the room, done with sort of baffle boards and so forth. So that it feels like it should be the most clattery room of all, but actually it's a dead sound, and you can speak a bit like in the Whispering Gallery of St. Paul's. You can speak from one side and be heard on the other without raising your voice. What else was it? It was disappointing that there was less to feel of the fabric of the building on that particular tour for me. And what else did I feel? I think I felt, I mean, Claire had done her homework. Boy, had she done her homework. There wasn't anything on the subject that hadn't been read. The notes were comprehensive, but it was a lot. It was a lot of content for a tour, and I think probably there was, for my taste, there was quite a lot of talk about it, and less actual moving about the space and feeling things. But I don't know. Claire, what was your feeling on that tour that you did, and how it went compared to other ones you've done, and what the constraints were?
I think I really agree with what you say about the value of having an expert on the building with the describer. I mean, I've always done tours like that, and I wouldn't really want to try and do one just as on my own, because you can't become an architectural expert overnight. I mean, they're incredibly complex, the history of these buildings, and Tim, you were talking about the stories behind buildings as well, and there are so many of them, and it is usually only the expert that has access to those stories and that sort of inside knowledge, which brings a place to life. And I think that what worked particularly well with this tour for me was Katie, the librarian you were talking about. She was she absolutely got what I was trying to achieve, in that a lot of experts will just want to go into their comfort zone and talk about what they know best. But obviously with an audio described tour, there's certain information that needs to be conveyed first before you get into that. And she absolutely got that. So we were kind of able to work as a team, passing things backwards and forwards. So that was very satisfying to work with, and I felt very supported, because I'm always aware with these tours that I'm a visitor to the building, and yet I'm, as the describer, because it's an audio described tour, everyone's kind of looking to me to lead it. And I feel a little bit of an imposter sometimes, because it's not my building. I don't know it as well as the people there. And yet everyone kind of assumes that I do. So I was very much kind of being able to have a good partnership with the expert, and sort of various tours I've done. That's been, some have been absolutely brilliant. Sometimes I try and have a rehearsal, or at least a meeting with the expert first, and we actually agree what the content is going to be. But I do take your point, Edward. I think we possibly tried to pack too much into that tour. But what's really difficult with that particular building is there is a ceremonial aspect to it. The whole kind of way people move through that building. So to actually leave any of it out seemed to be losing part of that particular story. With hindsight, I think I would have maybe tried to cut things down a bit.
Yes, we lost half our visually impaired group who had to go off and find a loo at one point. So and because it was an hour and a half or so, was it, or 2 hours?
Yes, yeah.
Something like that. But I mean, I got very good value for money for my mind. So I had lots of library time, lots of furniture time as well, thanks to Katie. But it was, which are two of my additional interests. But I also think that I couldn't see how you could start the tour in a place where you could be a procession, say, now feel what it's like to be the procession that comes down from the council chamber, down the grand staircase into the larger meeting rooms where the whole convocation of the college meets. There wasn't a way to actually start the tour in that.
Yeah, I mean that would have been great if we could have described as we were moving. I mean, I think the challenge with describing buildings is it's not practical to try and describe on the hoof. You have to structure it with stops, particularly if you've got a large group, because otherwise people can't hear you, people are losing what you're doing. Also, there's kind of, from a sort of practical point of view, it's just not practical to try and do it that way. So it does take a lot longer than a standard tour, because you have to say, right, we're going to get to this point, and this is the best place, particularly for people with partial sight. They'll be able to pick up some of what is being referred to here. So it does take a lot longer in that sense. But yes, it would have been lovely to do that, wouldn't it? To actually process as physicians through that building, which is what it was designed for.
Yes.
But I think it's the challenge I always find with audio description is if with full use of sight, you can take in a lot of things at once and hold them all in your head, and you don't actually necessarily know what the significance of those things are, but your brain kind of can hold on to them until it becomes clear what the significance is. When you're having to put things into words, you're having to decide an order. It's like, I'm going to have to tell people that first, then that, then that. And what is the best order is, I mean, it's interesting because I've described that building a number of times before, and each time I've done it slightly differently because I thought, no, actually, I think it probably works better to do it that way. And a lot of it's to do with the kind of the mood I'm in that day, or just kind of what the general vibe seems to be. But it's how we take in information is a very individual thing, and it doesn't always. It's not always going to suit everybody. It might suit one person and not somebody else. So it's not an exact science. I think it's quite a tricky thing. But the good thing about live tours, as opposed to recorded ones, is that you can have this interaction. So there was time for people to actually ask questions. So if something wasn't quite chiming for an individual, you could actually step in and go, sorry, can you explain a bit more about that? Or I don't quite get that.
Can I pick up on something which you said, Edward, about the sensory element of being able to touch things? How important is that to you in one of these sort of tours?
Well, increasingly. So my sight loss has been a long journey. I was night blind at birth, and but I was still able to play football as a teenager. I was able to drive till I was 21, and now I can do a little bit of typing on the screen, but I can't see any faces on the screen. So to get a sense of the space when I go into a room, it's really helpful to be told that it's 36 feet long and 24 feet wide and 18 foot tall, because that tells me as an enthusiast for architecture that that's a Palladian proportion, and that it was one of the great classical perfect shapes for a room, that it was done by somebody who understood classical architecture. But then if it's got a carved chimney piece, and if it's got carved skirting boards and dado rails and architraves and so on, being able to feel them gives you a much better description than if somebody says it's a slightly Gothic-y room with quatrefoil clusters forming the architraves around the windows. You don't really get it from the words in the way that you would. And also, I've got the vocab, but lots of people who are coming to appreciate that for the first time wouldn't know what a quatrefoil cluster is. So when you feel it, you can understand immediately what it's like. and it feels like thin versions of ribbing in a church, or if you want a memory verse. So I think that kind of touching, to me, is that a lot of architecture is plain boxes, which are then, from interior point of view, they are then decorated in a style which could be, Gothic if it's Victorian, or it could be classical if it's Georgian, and feeling that the craftsmanship as well as the design is part of the sensory experience which most people get through their eyes, but you can guess every bit as much through touch, I think.
And Claire, how difficult was it for you to get elements of that incorporated? Was it hard for you to get that when you were doing your prep? I'm
going to give you one example of where it was impossible for Claire to do it, because she said the ceiling doesn't actually touch the walls. It's sort of and I'm tall, but not that tall.
See, but I'm like sort of thinking in your preparation and when you're talking to the people of the building, and like, is it a challenge for you to get those elements incorporated?
Well, it really does depend on the building. I mean, in this case, a lot of things were just simply out of reach. So you had to rely on description. I mean, there were some elements. There was the floating staircase, wasn't there, that didn't actually touch the floor, and we were able to trace that, the line of that.
Yes.
So I mean, and then I think in the I've forgotten the name of the room now, the sensors room, that's right, we were able to feel the wood paneling around there. But it's interesting as well, you say, touch that again, how much people want to touch things varies enormously. I mean, there are some visually impaired people I've worked with who actually are not keen on touching things at all. So it's like, I think that part of the challenge is that everybody's different. So it's trying to find a kind of a happy medium where you're going to meet as many people's needs as you can.
I'm going to bring in Charmaine and say, are you a toucher or a non-toucher?
I was just about to interject, really. That's a real. I'm loving the conversation. It's a fantastic conversation. Thank you. I would say, I have been visually impaired and partially deaf as well for nearly 8 years. And I've been coming to terms with that through those 8 years. So I lost sight and hearing at age 45. So I was well versed in the arts and all these kind of spaces from a sighted perspective until that point. So I've been learning to live again in the last 8 years. And I would say I was not previously a very touchy-feely kind of person. Now, I went to a touch tour at the Chelsea Physic Garden. It was a piece of PhD research, actually. So they were doing a sensory tour of the Chelsea Physic Garden, and they were doing some tactile tours of plants. So they were like working out how they were going to do this. And I loved that, just being able to, and I'm not particularly into plants either, but just being able to touch those plants and really get a sense of what they were all about in association with the audio description as well was just brilliant. I loved it. And I thought, I'm losing a trick here, not being into this. I really need to touch more. Now, what I would say, adding on to that, I don't know if any of you went to, there was an exhibition at the Oxo Tower a couple of months ago in September. I think it was called Touch Beyond Vision, and there were lots of like 3D printed, very, very sophisticated, layered, almost like sculptures of popular people. But also there was Stonehenge, there were sort of, heritage monuments as well. It was just brilliant. They had Braille, I'm learning Braille as well. They had Braille on the exhibits. They had headphones for AD, and then you could touch it as well. And I went with a guide communicator from Deafblind UK, a really brilliant guy who I hadn't actually met before. I just met him on the day. And we made it, again, a bit of a game of it. I was reading the Braille. I was saying what I thought I could see with my residual eyesight, which was sometimes right and sometimes very, very wrong. I mean, there was a like a 3D sculpture of, it was actually the Beatles, the band The Beatles, so it was John, Paul, George and Ringo, and I thought it was Mount Rushmore. He was like, no, Charmaine, it's the Beatles. I was like, oh no, I've not hit the mark there. But it was, the sophistication of this like printing or however they did it, like layer upon micro upon layer on layer on layer, is so detailed. It really gave you a beautiful impression in absence of having good eyesight of what that person or that building, that heritage site was all about. So yeah, I am a toucher now. I'd embrace it whenever it's offered.
Can I just ask there, Claire here, Charmaine, though, how would it have been? What was the order description alongside touching those?
Yeah, so these were like basically they had like pedestals and they'd limited the amount of people that could go so that you weren't everyone. There weren't too many people there, but there was enough and people were absolutely loving it. So you had like the 3D sculpture on the top of a plinth. There was some braille on the plinth, so you knew where to find the braille, and they had a headset alongside as well, which you could listen to the audio description on.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to ask Tim. So Tim, you've got probably more vision than. So once something's been pointed out to you, like say on the Chatsworth tour, do you feel the need to be a touchy person, or can you make it out once it's briefly
I
described?
think because I've been on, sort of countless touch tours, and I always make it. I always like. I have got sight, but if I take my glasses off, I can hardly see a thing. And I find, I really find touching a really beneficial experience now because I kind of get a completely different insight into something. Because I tend to rely just on the touch of something instead of like looking at it and the sensations and the texture and I think that sort of translates quite a lot. I think with the Chatsworth tour, and it was at Christmas as well, when the house was kind of laden with it like Christmas decorations and ornaments and things everywhere, that there were a lot of things that we could touch. They had like miniatures of things which you could touch that had been made up, and they had lots of fabrics like the curtains and those sorts of things which you could feel and have a touch of. And I think that that really does help to kind of give it a three-dimensional element. It's especially for me, if it's close up and I don't have bad light, then I can actually see it and I can actually make it out. But I think touching really helps. But I know quite a few sort of visually impaired people who haven't got that much sight at all, who don't want to touch things at all. So it's a personal preference thing as well, some
Do you
of
think,
what people need.
Tim, do you think you had to teach yourself to feel the benefit of touching?
Yeah, I think it's something which has evolved over 12 or 13 years, if I'm honest. I think it's something that, because I think I'm at a stage now where I can't not actually go through that experience and I get a lot out of it. Where I think when I first sort of did it, in the beginning, it was something that I was just touching things but not really getting anything out of it. And I think it's a completely different experience now.
So yeah, for my part, I think it was that we're suffering from very slow sight loss. I was sort of feeling, well, I can't quite make it out, but I'd be a bit of a fraud if I actually, went forward like with two hands, as if I could see nothing, just to feel everything, especially in a National Trust property where you're ignoring all the do not touch signs and everything else. And I'm sufficiently literate in, say, furniture to be able to feel the legs and the back and understand the design of the chair and feel the quality of it. And all I'd need somebody to tell me is what the timbers are, if I can't feel what that timber is.
Yeah, I mean, this is. If I can just interject here, Edward, it's Claire here. This is always a challenge because there can be a train of thought that is absolutely essential that something is touched. And as you say, you know basically what how a chair is structured. It's only if it's an unusual chair that you might need to know more.
But I think there's also there's the giving yourself permission to touch as you come to terms with a disability. If your blindness is through sight loss rather than never having had vision, there is the need to allow yourself to do it, and to accept that actually that you need that for benefit. And then there's the additional thing, which is that Tim was saying, which is that if and in fact Charmaine was saying as well in relation to plants, which is if somebody is describing as you touch, you can feel the curve of the knee of this chair, and then if the leg comes down in the curve, it gets a sort of slim ankle. At the bottom, you've got a ball and then 3 claws of an eagle holding the ball, and that's what's called a ball and claw foot, and that then provides you with the language to appreciate what it is that you've experienced. So the audio described visit gives you the opportunity to have the sense of touch explained to you in language which relates to what somebody drawing it would say, for example.
It's Charmaine. I think that's a really important point, Edward. And I wrote a blog. I'll send it on to you all after this. As a result of that experience I had in the Sensational Museum exhibition at Keswick Museum and Art Gallery at the end of the summer holidays. So and it's about collaboration, I think, within yourself of a multisensory approach. So touch enhances what you might be able to or may not be able to see a little bit, what you can pick up from the audio description. They all enhance each other. So it's, we all do things differently, but we use our senses differently, and we use different tools and hacks to pick up on things. And I think a multisensory kind of collaborative sensory approach is really important to get the full picture. So it might be an amalgam of all of those things. But also, I think, that was a really interesting part of your conversation earlier, that, you might have a curatorial expert in the room or on the Zoom with you, with the audio describer, and the extent to which those two people can collaborate so that the audio describer's absolute skill in getting across what blind and partially sighted people need, and also conveying in language the sort of multisensory approach, along with the expertise, which is absolutely necessary from the curatorial expert or other professional. And I think sometimes, the curator, I've certainly been on Zoom calls of audio described paintings in a museum sort of situation, where you can almost feel that the expert, the curator, feels a bit, because the audio describer is so good at conveying that it's a different skill to the curator. But obviously the curator's expertise about the work is absolutely, so it's really a collaborative process. It's all about collaboration, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, ultimately there's a cost effectiveness question, which is how many people can be afforded. So that the business model of costing Clare's fee to do for London Open House Weekend, which relies on voluntary donations, to do a tour for 2 visually impaired people, it's a big chunk of the budget going on to visitors, and I don't know what is viable, but particularly in the historic buildings which are open sporadically. But they're not actually visitor attractions. So it's a really big challenge of where do you find the money to bring an expert and to bring an audio describer and to market it to visually impaired people, and all the other things like Paul Downs did. He offered a walking crocodile from Regent's Park Tube and things like that. None of these things happen spontaneously. They all have to be worked on. Ros, I'm going to bring you in. How does any of this chime with your experience, and do you have anything to add?
A couple of things. I think I'd like to do with this kind of thing is to give a sense of space, and find out if it actually chimes with the people's experience of it, because you put somebody in a room who's visually impaired, and they will have an impression of what that room is like. And once you've given the sense of space, then you can do a kind of now read on description, really. I think it is exhausting to stand there and have somebody describe for 20 minutes, and you not have any other input, not be able to touch anything or get close to things. I've found quite a lot of people, particularly those people who have their vision impairment through something like diabetic retinopathy, they actually find it hard to touch. Not just hard to touch, because it's something else that's failed them. Their sense of touch is something else that's failed them. And they really find it quite difficult when people say, would you like to touch this? And they know that they won't get anything out of it because they've lost the sensitivity to get anything out of it. I think also, if you have an audio describer who is labeling things, then they need to go back to school. The labeling things, like saying, oh, it's a ball and claw foot. What does that actually mean? To just a ball and claw foot, move on. It's I would be very upset to have somebody talk about quatrefoil moldings without allowing people to handle them first and then saying they're quatrefoil moldings. As far as the money to get together, Vocalize used to do this as well, it still does now, presumably. Clare is back to it. It was a huge grant. It was a huge grant. Toby Davey used to do this every year, find this absolutely enormous grant, so that we could do 6 buildings usually, isn't it, Clare? Yeah, about 6 buildings.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Sometimes the buildings were particularly popular, so there were repeats, but often it was the ones that would not be available to anybody else otherwise. It was office buildings that were very heavily architectured and had an awful lot of architectural aspects in them. I can remember working with a ballet company who had a particular space designed for them, for this particular ballet company, and it had horsehair walls. And of course, you want people to touch that. But if you've got 30 people and a very small space, and they all want to touch the walls at the same time, it does get difficult, and it does take quite a long time. And then people get frustrated at the back because they haven't got anything to do. I don't know if that chimes with you at all, Clare.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the challenge. It's like you were talking, Edward, about the model, which was such a boon at the Royal College of Physicians to have that. But fortunately, we had a small group. But when you've got a group of 20 people, all trying to get everyone to have access to the model,
Plus companions.
yeah, it's quite difficult, and then going back to what we were talking about earlier about that feeling that model will make better sense if it can be accompanied by description, but not everyone can feel it at once. So that's quite a tricky aspect to manage. But just jumping back to what you were mentioning, Ros, about managing these projects. I think what was interesting was when Vocalize had funding to do it, they really micromanaged the marketing of it.
Yeah.
It was specifically, there was a targeted group of people, that there, and everybody got a phone call, everybody had everything explained to them. I think Vocalize would bring in sighted volunteers as well if any assistance was
Yes.
needed. So it was really tightly managed in that sense, which is why usually the tours were sold out. Well, I say sold out, but they were free. But they were usually full. But then a lot of hours went into managing that, and it was bespoke marketing for that.
It's basically
particular
half of
event.
Toby's year, wasn't it? Was organising that. And of
Yeah.
course, going there and getting the permission to do the things and visiting them beforehand and finding out if they were actually going to be interesting in a tactile way. And also just, there were stories surrounding them. I've been the one I went on to the at Guildhall, I was promised somebody who was an expert on it, and I ended up getting somebody who was actually in security, because that's the only
Yes.
person they could
Yes,
actually field
you've got to make sure you've got the right person
Oh,
with you,
God,
haven't you?
that was a mission. That really was.
Yes, I
Lovely
mean,
bloke, but oh,
I know other describers. Yeah, I think there was one at Bush House where somebody was actually just reading from bits of paper, the so-called expert. It was, so it's kind of
So
hit and miss.
I'm going to go back to the marketing point, the bespoke marketing. So because one of the big complaints from many audio describers is 25, 30 years on from when the audio description was being normalized, the size of the audience for audio described activities is still painfully small in so many cases. And that seems to be not a lack of interest or demand. It's just an inability to market in such a way that it reaches the audience and makes it feel like something that they will A, want to do, and B, can do. And what do you think that Vocalize got right about that marketing to have those tours full? What was
I think it
the
was a personal
bespoke?
approach.
Did
Yeah,
they
I
have
think
did
it
they
was
have
a
a list
personal
of
approach.
people?
They didn't start out with a list of people, but obviously once they'd done the first one and they realised that there was a market for it, and the it was heavily marketed through their website, but also through emails, and they came back. They asked questions about what people felt they wanted from it before they even started looking around. And there were some of the things that you've said that both of you have said, Charmaine as well. Hello, Charmaine.
Hi.
Um, it was, I want something to touch. I want something that's got history to it. The historical ones are nearly always full, aren't they, Claire?
Yeah.
The modern architecture does tend to be a bit more niche. I mean, and there were times when you had fewer than 10 people for the modern architecture, but you would be sold out. You could have sold out 3 times if to do something like I don't know, trying to think of something that would be really interesting that they were doing. I think Bletchley Park was one that was really quite interesting because it had
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean I did Haberdashers Hall, which is a modern guild building, guild hall building.
mm,
But they kind of reinvented the whole concept of a guild. So they've still got the enclosed courtyard and they've still got the grand hall, but with a modern slant. And that was quite a dream from a to describe because you had all the traditional elements, but with a modern slant on it. So architecturally, you still had the vaulted ceiling with all the ribbing on it, but it was very modern. So that was yeah that was very well attended, that one actually. But I do wonder whether it's not so always so much the building, whether it's I think word gets round that you will have a good time on one of these tours, and I
yeah,
think that did happen for a number of years with the vocalized ones because people knew that it was going to be well managed and everything, as within reason, most things were going to be thought of and covered. Now, this particular time round, there wasn't any. I don't think there was any sort of dedicated vocalized input to it, other than asking me to do it. That was the difference between what had happened previously.
I mean, there was a lot of research that went on beforehand
Yeah,
to find out what actually people wanted, and then Toby, as a blind person who's very interested in architecture, would go around the various places and select them, and then have these conversations about what was possible and how many people could come. I mean, there are some places that are very small, and there would be a risk element if you were having 30 or 40 people around, because it's not just the blind people, it is the companions and the dogs as well. If you could have 40, 50 people going around, and that would need a very different place from something like the photographer's gallery. So, and then it was a question of getting the word out there, through things like talking books, talking newspapers, actually speaking to people from the retinitis pigmentosa associations, so to get that kind of thing. And I actually found when I was doing it, there were people I never met at theatre, in the theatre. Most of them were people who had a real interest and a real joy in getting out and describing and exploring new places. You talk to them about audio description in theatre and say, well, that's not my bag. I'd much rather do this kind of thing because it was what I used to do before I lost my
yeah,
sight, and I want to
yeah.
retain that.
And obviously, it was marketed by Open House as well.
It was, yes.
Yes, but it was kind of then it was yeah, there was this kind of side project going on, wasn't there? With it, anybody who was doing an audio described tour was then handed over to Vocalize to
Mhm.
get the sort of the details.
Yes, I mean, on this occasion, I don't know what Open House did to market it, but I think that the guy who Paul brought came through Ada as well. So it was only the marketing through Ada that got 2 people. Otherwise, it would have been a no-show.
Yeah, I do remember Paul felt that they didn't they expected everybody to use their kind of mainstream booking process, and the marketing, there was nothing specific done for the audio described tours, which he felt was a mistake.
I think it's a huge loss actually, because they took a lot of organising, but they were huge fun, and people came back year after year after year.
Going back to the modern tours, the modern architecture tours, which are likely to get smaller audiences, what do you think? I'm going to ask Ros and Claire this. What do you think about the investment going into training Katie, the librarian, or whoever it may be, and working with them on a script, and then not actually being the deliverer on the day? So
well, we don't work to a script. We're not reading things out. We might have notes, but we're not actually reading things out, and we don't. It shouldn't be a script, because you should be reacting to the people around you who are asking questions.
No, I realise that one has to riff on it, but essentially, in order to know what to say, you've got to work out what you're going to say. Sorry if I called it a script when there's something else, but what I meant to say, it's the order of proceedings and what you're going to say at each stopping point. So, but what I'm wondering is, actually on the day when the group is very small, is a describer adding enough value to justify the cost, or should the describer really be investing the time at the earlier stage in developing the skill of the true in-house person, not the security guard?
Well, I mean, but that already happens, in that a lot of training goes on on heritage sites with staff. The idea being that they can deliver their own.
But I didn't just mean training. I mean actually working with them on the tour and saying, developing a bit like somebody working with you on pre-show notes or something.
Yeah, I did that. I did that at Cutty Sark.
Yes.
They asked me to do a tour of the Cutty Sark, which I did.
Yes.
And then I was shadowed by some of their staff, and I think I did some sessions with them. And then they took my script and I haven't. That was quite a long time ago, probably about a decade ago. So I don't know how that developed, but that was a starting point for them.
Right. Well, I'm going to say thank you, because our hour is up. And apologies to anybody watching this on catch up that you missed it live. We started late because we had a technical problem. And I'm also going to finish up by asking, because Yusuf asked that I ask, what would you like for December? And so this is for Tim and Charmaine. Would you like fireworks, in which you say bang, and or would you like pantomime, in which case you say, oh yes, we do? Charmaine.
Sorry, what was the alternative to fireworks again?
Pantomime. Panto.
Sorry, I've got a hearing impairment. I didn't catch it.
Pantomime. Christmas panto.
Oh, pantomime. Yeah, I think I would go for pantomime personally.
Oh, yes, you would. Right. And Tim?
Oh, yes, I would.
Oh, yes, you would. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll report that back to you. Everybody wants to say.
I'm quite interested. I'm really interested to hear lots of different views of VI users in relation to Panto. Because I've been to a lot of Pantos, so it would be interesting to hear that.
Okay, I think that we've enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to leave the last words to Claire and Ros to say what they've got out of today's session, and then we'll bring it to a close.
There.
Yeah, I've really appreciated. I wish we'd had a bigger group in a way, because it's really been great for me to have the time to hear what everyone thinks, actually, because although you try and get feedback, often it's quite rushed and there isn't the opportunity. So thank you. It's been really interesting.
I think it's actually worth repeating this one to get another group of people in, because I think it's actually very valuable. It's not just talking about the open house, but it is talking about how you describe the space. and giving people the space, because you're often going into a place, even when you go into a theatre, people want to know what the surroundings are like. People want to know if there are particular mouldings, perhaps, that they can touch. Just getting people onto the stage is not always enough.
That's great. Okay, thank you, everybody. And I'm going to let Ros chuck us all out because she's in charge.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Lovely.
Thank you.